Yeah.
So again, the idea behind the panel is just to give you primarily an opportunity to talk to each of these individuals up here. We have representation, obviously, from Ben from NOAA, on VanSumeren, if you don't know him, is the director of the Great Lakes Water Studies Institute at Northwestern Michigan College, and then Tim Kearns is the Chief Information Officer with GLOS. And so somewhat this panel is just an extension of the conversation that started with Ben's presentation about collaboration and partnership. And as long as any program, and I'm a program manager by education, requires a clear understanding of the roles of each partner. And so that's the intent of somewhat today's conversation is how do we define the roles of this partner as we keep moving this Lakebed 2030 campaign moving forward. The format is pretty straightforward. I've got a couple questions I'll ask the folks here. They can just rotate down the aisle if they would like. And at the end, we're going to open it up to you guys. So really the first question, and Ben, some of these that follow on to your presentation, so feel free to just pass if you need to. Really the first question is, where does your organization fit into the Lakebed 2030 campaign? Go ahead.
Actually, one of the, since I talk a lot about that presentation, start somewhere else and we'll add some color.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ed. Thanks, you guys, for making me go first. So the Great Lakes Observing System, for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, we're an IACE regional association, the only certified regional association in the Great Lakes. And our real challenge is to make data information available for the Great Lakes region. So we aggregate a number of data sources, most historically from sort of weather and sort of physical parameter buoys that collect information in the Great Lakes, and then we make that publicly available. In many cases, we turn that data around and push that sort of into the federal data warehouses or others who are interested through a variety of different services. But we started connected with NMC a few years ago, about three and a half years ago, on the Lakebed 2030 initiative, and recognizing that bathymetry really from an OBS world, right? So GLOS is part of the OBS world, observable systems. Bathymetry is a foundational data set. It's critical and it's important for modeling. And how can we protect what we don't know? And so we need to know more about bathymetry. So this was a great opportunity to work with NMC and others for GLOS to get involved in a region-wide bathymetric initiative. Now, GLOS is a pretty small group, right? Although we're federally funded, we do take in some other sources of revenue, and we see ourselves mostly as a coordinating body. And we worked with Orange Forest Marine to do some crowdsourced bathymetry work. We've been developing a data pipeline, and we see ourselves to help evangelize the Lakebed 2030 initiative and help coordinate. And in some cases, grant funds where appropriate and available for others to continue to stimulate technology, data pipelines, or the message. So I think that's kind of where GLOS sits in this partnership.
So I can speak from the NMC side, and if you heard my message this morning, for us it's workforce, it's the development of that workforce and creating the opportunities. And I think last night there were a lot of people came up and said, looking forward to the employer roundtable. I want to talk and I want to hire students. And I think it's a weekly, if not sometimes multi times per week, where phone calls come in. I need people. I need a dozen people. Well, we don't have a dozen graduates, and I think combined with all the schools, we're all facing a shortage of bringing enough students into the pipeline so that we can embed those skills, and that's at all levels. There are the blue collar jobs, the white collar jobs, and we had this discussion a few weeks ago up at Michigan Tech, the no collar job or the new collar job, and that is really a set of competencies that make you a valuable contributor to a team. And I think most academic programs try to teach towards that, but there's new ways that we can start to look at that, maybe condensing that time to train someone to be a valuable person. And from our perspective at the college, it's really a focus that we feel is important. Being a convener of this conversation, the college and the institute has always been trying to be not only a provider of talent and workforce, but a neutral convener, because many of these topics, not necessarily Lakebed, but many are controversial when it comes to water. Water is always a polarizing discussion, depending on what side of the fence you're on, depending on the situation you're dealing with. So the college needs to maintain that role, and even hearing from you this morning and some of the challenges that you had with just your launch and that type of training might not be taught. I was an engineer by training, and we didn't get taught how to fix outboard motors or make generators work. I mean, you figure that stuff out eventually, but there is another set of that workforce that does need to do that and be confident in collecting good quality survey data. So that's where I see the NMC contribution long term, and I think that that's never not going to be a need.
So no, the survey in the Lakebed 2030 campaign, I talked a bit about this morning. I won't reiterate those points. Just to say, I think we have obviously some capacity to bring to the table, but also recognizing that this really is a locally led campaign. And so I think that the chief things, perhaps the most important things that we can bring are some of our expertise, assist with that capacity development, and helping develop standards, sharing our standards so that we can all work together and everything meshes together neatly at the end. One of the things I didn't spend a lot of time on this morning, though, is coordination of survey effort within our integrated ocean coastal mapping group and the work on the sea sketch site. We provide a place where various different entities can share their survey plans, which are not all collecting the same data, which regret to say has happened occasionally. And then I think the other big thing that we share that we can bring is our international coordination with CHS. Not that we're the only ones who can talk to the Canadians, but through our U.S. Canada Hydrographic Commission, that gives us a strong way to leverage that partnership.
Thank you. Can each of you then talk about sort of your near and long-term plans for sort of meeting this goal of mapping the Great Lakes? I guess, Ben, since you've got the mic.
Sure, I'll start. Well, I think our first goal is to wrap up our field season safely and effectively, and get the PJ on our way home and get that survey work done on Lake Ontario on the way. But then, more to the point, I think, and there's been some allusion to this. Our longer term goal is to get the data into the hands of the people who need it in a fit for purpose format with high fidelity. And fundamentally, that's central to the survey strategy. Frankly, it's not something we're especially good at right now. Our traditional product-based workflow, the product being the nautical chart, is a very laborious process, a very painstaking process, a very accurate process. But it can be a slow process. And I think we've heard already this morning about the needs for this data in a more timely fashion. And again, in a fit for purpose format, not everybody needs a chart. People may need high resolution bathymetry. They need access to that raw abstract data so that they can produce habitat maps. They need different pieces of that data stream and getting those through the process as quickly as possible and into the hands of those who need it. I mentioned our Blue Topo project, which we think once it's built out will really help us in the national bathymetric source, will help us ingest that sort of data much more quickly in a much more automated fashion. But getting that set up and going is an area of considerable effort for our office right now. I think it will be slightly longer term. As I mentioned, we plan to continue to support survey work here in the Great Lakes with a mix of in-house and contract resources. And we look forward to next year. I think we have some funding lined up to bring our team a little back to the area. I think that's the list. And I think another area where we're devoting a lot of effort right now is to expanding our partnership with sanctuaries. One of the NOF, National Ocean Service strategic goals is what we're calling conserve, restore, connect. And it's around that conservation mission of sanctuaries. But frankly, we know the federal government can't make good conservation decisions if we don't know what's there. We can't decide what to conserve, and we can't make good management plans if we don't know what's there. So extending that relationship with sanctuaries is definitely on our agenda as well.
And I think building off what our president said last night, the college is looking at a new strategic plan that is amplifying what we call distinctive programs. And from that perspective, that brings our college to a broader reach for attracting more talent, more students to come into our programs. So we got to fill that pipeline from people knowing about these programs. So the outreach locally, regionally, nationally is something that is high on our list. So people are aware of these programs. You all are now champions of Traverse City. Hey, you've been here before and maybe say a few words about us. But the point is, a lot of people don't, and they, oh, I've never heard of this town. Why would I go there? And why do you have this talent and this training program? So we want to get that message out. And then I think the other thing that is exemplified in conversations throughout is that people really don't understand what this technology does in terms of understanding that. And it's not just a depth and location, but it's all the other things that are attached to that. And there was a project we worked on. The other thing, these lakes don't go to bed in the wintertime. They may freeze over, but stuff still occurs. And so a lot of that understanding needs to start with the foundational information. And people are starting to make those connections, but getting the word out. There's a fish that we discovered in East Bay in March a couple of years ago in 600 feet of water. Had never been captured before, never been seen before. It's a deep water sculpin, 3-inch long fish, and had an egg sac next to it. And the point of this is that would never be known to be in that location because we don't have any of the information of the lake floor in that area that would tell us to characterize this area a little further. We'll never know how to better manage and sustain things like fisheries and habitat regions without starting with this kind of data. So emphasizing that to the communities we speak with, so people are more engaged and being more of a community support of what we're doing is really where I see our work in the near and long-term future.
Sorry, for those of you that know me, I coughed it just while I brought my water bottle with me. I'm fine, honestly. So gloss is, I mean, we've got a pretty good plan for both the short and the long term. We released our strategic plan a year and a half ago, and for as it relates to Lakebed 2030, part of that is to grow Lakebed 2030. We maintain and host the lakebed2030.org website. We work with a number of partners across the region. We've done a lot of evangelism and marketing for Lakebed 2030, and we'll continue to do so. If one thing that we've learned at GLOS, and part of the advantage of being a quasi binational nonprofit, is that we can do things that are maybe outside of sort of restricted areas, not restricted areas, but it's easier for us to do stuff as a nonprofit. And we touch a lot of different people because of the types of data that we have to serve. We have literally hundreds of thousands of people a year visiting our products and website that communicate about data and information in Great Lakes. We intend to grow that. When you just think about where we were only 3 years ago back in this room, we were still kind of talking like, yeah, like by 2030 is cool. We should do it. But we didn't really know what that meant at the time, But here we are, 3 years later. We've suffered, probably we had a global pandemic, and we've made phenomenal progress without even being able to meet in person. So I think GLOS is able to help continue that. And the grassroots bathymetry initiative that we started with Northwestern Michigan has been good. Lyndon's going to show some progress that we've done on the technology side to help visually communicate. I always like to, I drew up quite a bit about make it so my mom can understand it. And my mom's a smart woman, but she's not a technologist, and she doesn't really understand the technology the way we all may do inherently. So you need to be able to communicate in a manner that makes it super easy, because if you make it super easy for people to understand, and then those people can influence their local legislators or politicians, then we can put more pressure on additional appropriation and funding to continue to fund these efforts. Everybody knows that lake floor mapping and ocean mapping is not a highly profitable industry. It's super expensive. And even though there's new technologies that are coming on, semi-autonomous vehicles and remote control vehicles, it's still really expensive to develop that technology. And as Hans knows, it's a very limited workforce who can support the type of data that's coming on it. So for GLOS, short term is to continue building up partnerships, help lead the coalition around Lakebed 2030, which is sort of an open invitation, I think, at this stage. But certainly it involves NFC, NOAA, CHS, and others, who are available and interested in supporting it. And then long term, it's additionally seeking funding streams so that we can fund this. If you've had an opportunity, David's got some we've got some on our table out there at the GLOS table on the cost and approaches document, the report that we made, and we did that in conjunction with Food Grow and Ex-Ocean Northwestern Michigan, and we had it reviewed by many to make sure we weren't completely off the mark. But ballpark, $200 million to map the Great Lakes in high density. That was sort of the answer that we came to. Maybe it's a little 10K, 10 million here, 10 million there, I don't know, but it's a lot. And OSCO survey and Canadian Hydrographic Service don't have those budgets to do the kind of dedicated modeling. So are there things that we as a nonprofit can do to help? Yeah, maybe. So let's explore that. And it's, I think, part of what we want to do.
Thanks. And Tim, I guess while you're there, you talked about the plan, you talked about the need for funding, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what you think are the biggest barriers? I mean, is it beyond the funding to your implementation of that plan?
I think, to me, it's a short line between funding and awareness. And I think there's probably hundreds of examples out there where there was no money to do X, but then as soon as the public became aware of it and there was enough momentum behind whatever that initiative is, then funding appeared, whether that's through corporate sponsorships or more funding allocated at the sort of legislative level, or maybe it's just individuals who are interested in doing their part. And so I think that awareness is a barrier, and I think that contributes to, even awareness, like Senator Peters earlier today, like how phenomenal is that there's a senator who's not physically here, but speaking about this very issue. And I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have that participation. And we had another similar event in the spring when Congresswoman Dingell recorded the message. So, we're getting the message out there, and it's really good that we get the message out there, but we all need to be a bit of a mouthpiece to keep spreading word, and we need to do it in a manner that makes it easily digestible. Then I think it'll be easier to get the funding. So I see those as sort of related barriers.
Sure. So areas we've talked about funding for operations, and I won't belabor that affects all of us. But I think building that advocacy is critical. But I think one of the things I think about a lot is that I think there's a perception that once the data is acquired, once the fieldwork is done, it just automatically appears. It be either on the chart or again, in what the fit for purpose product is for the people who need it. And that's of course not true. And so when I think about how do we build advocacy, it's building an understanding of not only the data acquisition side of this, but the assimilation and dissemination part, and speaking for NOAA and survey. I think our resource structure, our workflow is pretty in that respect. So that's definitely a barrier for us. And I alluded to that in our challenges in getting data turned around. I think many of you experience that. So what I think is that is one of the keys to and how do we, as much as we need more data and more money to do data acquisition, we really need to now without that workflow, so we're having sort of support for getting that data in the hands of people in the right format. I think another piece here, and this has been alluded to, that in terms of workforce development, that's a significant barrier for us. I was doing some quick math, and I think any given time in NOAA fleet, this is just in the White House. This is not in the navigation response teams. This is not folks who do mapping, also our agency. But we have 30 to 40 people on our list at any given time who are hydrographers with less than 2 years experience. And where are those people coming from? That's a big question. And furthermore, how do we sustain that? Because I think that's an engine that we all draw. Our community is drawn on that. And I think elsewhere in NOAA, but also in the private sector and academia, a lot of those folks that are trained in our fleet are finding their way into the industry. So to me, that's an argument for sustaining our fleet. And that's a constant of sustaining two of our two most productive hydrographic surveys are 55 years old. And so how do we keep that engine flowing? So those are some of the areas that I think, again, it comes down to operations, shifts, people, and getting data to problems.
Yeah, I think I would only add that similarly, education is a business and funding is always a major need, and then recruiting that new talent is something that will never stop being a problem for us. And on the other side of that, outside of it, maybe NMC, it's sometimes it's the throttling of new technology that doesn't make its way into operations. And there's all kinds of things being developed at universities and through research throughout the country. And those products can generate new efficiencies that in the next year or two might reduce that $200 million. But are they being stalled because of maybe funding sources and investments that just aren't there for them? So I know many in this room are using those technologies and you've tried them out, but I think there's many more that could be introduced to support this effort.
And really, this is the last question. And again, it follows on to your presentation this morning, Ben, about this is a locally driven collaboration. We have 3 partners up here, but I'd like to maybe hear from you guys of what you feel would be, what is the role of the rest of us in part of this? And how can we help contribute to that effort in a meaningful way?
Sure. Yeah, it does build on some of the themes I mentioned. I think I'll just reiterate them. Yeah, I think stepping forward, to build capacity and leveraging these new technologies that have been mentioned. I think particularly for us in Coast Survey, our focus has to be on areas which are of navigational concern. And so identifying partners who can work and have interest in areas that they're not going to be in our direct area of interest is really critical. And again, that's a role I think that we can help support through our integrated ocean and coastal mapping program to identify and coordinate those efforts. So again, we're not running into each other out there on the water, which sometimes happens. And I think we can enable some of that through the Brennan Matching Fund that I mentioned. But really the goal should be the full utilization of our hydrographic assets. We really shouldn't have boats sitting at the dock waiting for people or gas because we've invested in the boat. We should really get them out there through whatever means. I would ask again that you share your survey plans via C-Sketch or other means. Share your data. Remember, if it's not the public domain, it doesn't count. So I don't think have quite the situation in the Great Lakes that we have perhaps in other areas of the US EEZ where there are large private holdings of bathymetric and seabed data that would be really, really valuable, as we do say in areas where often actually is a significant development. But I'm sure there's stuff out there that's sitting on a hard drive someplace that just hasn't made it into the public domain. I've asked you to go scour your shelves. And then I've harped on this, but developing a workforce. And I particularly want to commend the work of the college here because as many of you are aware, we at Coast Survey support a couple of graduate programs. We have our Joint Hydrographic Center at the University of New Hampshire. We have a growing center down at the University of South Florida, our Comet Center. Those folks are heavily focused on developing master's and PhD level hydrographers. And don't get me wrong, we need those people. Like those are the people who are developing these new technologies, developing the new software, developing new techniques. And we need the journeymen, we need the people who, we need the marine techs, we need the folks who are gonna come into those 30 to 40 relatively entry-level positions that we have just in our fleet every year. And I think, I had the pleasure to be up in Newfoundland for the Arctic Regional Hydrographic Commission meeting 3 weeks ago. I don't know, time has blurred. In St. John's, and we saw a lot of great capacity at Memorial University in Canada. And I think what we see here is very similar to that, with a real focus on that journeyman level workforce, which is every bit as critical as the upper level programs that we've been supporting.
And that was kind of where I was going to head to, and not just our program, but how can we articulate to these other places? Can the students who are here, the ones that aspire to go to that next level, how do we better connect with those universities that do offer those advanced programs? Because I think, and all of you know, anyone who's had that practical experience and then gets into the development or the theoretical side comes out of that with just a very competitive resume, because stuff goes wrong, it's got to be fixed, but it doesn't stop the innovative approaches that are trying to be developed or utilized. And so you get someone who goes through all that, I can see that as being valuable. And so it's sharing the resources, sharing of education resources and partnerships that I can see being a great opportunity for what we're trying to do.
Okay, I'll take the mic for a second. I would just add that I know a number of you were in the Joint Hydrographic Center program review a month and a half ago now or so. And Dr. Larry Bader, many of you know, stood up and made a, during the industrial consortium part of that meeting, he stood up and wagged his finger at his industrial consortium members because they're hiring these students before they're graduating. That's how much demand there is for this. And he's like, look, if you do this, you're undermining their research. Their theses don't get done. We don't get, and the body of knowledge is not advanced. And he really took it to task. I think that just underscores the need for additional capacity in this field.
I would not want to have Larry's finger wagging. Well, from my perspective and Floss's perspective, in terms of how do others get involved and who gets involved, there's a few vectors, and I think from a technology side, and it's so awesome to see so much great sponsorship and participation from technology providers here. It's the continued innovation and willing to go that extra mile, and the innovation that ultimately drives down cost, lowers the barriers to entry for others to use the technology. It's making the technology easier to use and hold in the hands of more people. So, even just the investment of people coming to this conference to be able to communicate about their technology that then can in turn get amplified for others to learn about it, I think is we need to keep that up. Another area where people can contribute is, like, specifically for Lakebed 2030, is just your ideas. And Admiral Evans has talked about a little bit about increasing efficiencies and looking for ways to optimize. And so, even Meredith and I were just talking a few weeks ago about some efforts that we entertained at GLOS, and I didn't really know that much about the Blue Turtle program, and it's phenomenal. It's like, great, let's operationalize and make increased efficiencies in the data processing pipeline for information that does come in, whether it comes in through private source groups or crowdsourced bathymetry or research work or whatever it may be. But let's streamline where it makes sense. And some of that just comes from sitting around a table and talking with each other and sharing ideas and brainstorming on ways that we can improve things. Another group that can get involved is the public. I think citizen science it's a real thing, and we're really seeing that, maybe not so much in the marine environment, but we're certainly seeing it in the terrestrial environment. So I think that's something that we can learn from and capitalize on. We've had good success with the crowdsourced bathymetry program. It's only 20 vessels or so that are out there this summer collecting data, and that's just a small, it was a relatively low investment by GLOS, $60,000 to $70,000 or something. And look at the phenomenal 5 million soundings or something have been collected. You know, that's like just dipping our toe in the water. And we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, I think. But you know, yes, we need to consider data quality that comes along with that. I think Denise Haynes is going to talk about that in the morning. And so, but there's still ways that we can get around that. So I don't think we should be afraid to get citizens and science and, you know, the public more involved. And once again, we were talking about this over drinks last night, like how did we all get involved in this? Well, maybe it was, you know, you saw a presentation at a school, you took a course at university, but if we can help, you know I keep going back to the evangelism, but if we can help get the word out, then we get more people interested in this field who then go to schools like NMC so that they can, you know, contribute to the programs and the mental health that are going on. So that's where I was saying.
So that's kind of the end of my questions. Now it's basically open the floor up to you folks to have any questions to any of our panelists. Janet.
Hi, I'm Janet McNeely with Teledyne Marine. I too noticed, like Tim, that it's so encouraging to see a senator say such supportive things about our industry and the work we do. I did notice the disconnect because he listed about 5 different programs that he said he brought to the state. And then we had a long discussion, a perennial discussion about funding. So I'm just curious if anyone knows those 5 programs that he mentioned. Do you have a tangible, application of those? Because it is, for us in this industry, we love what we do, and that's why we do it. I try not to be cynical about the government and the support we get. Now, having said all that, I want to say also that this panel is an utter reflection of reality. I wasn't on the NRT, in the NRT world when this Great Lakes and Gulf team got funded and got defunded. But later I went into private industry precisely because of everything we've been talking about, all the experience I gained with NOAA. So it is encouraging that these issues are understood, and they're understood on the ground by people who are trying to solve them. So if anyone has a further comment on the senator, I'd appreciate that. But if you don't, this is still really where the rubber meets the road.
Anyone further comment?
Well, I mean, I'll just talk a little bit. You mentioned about the $1 billion investment into GLRI. And actually, Klaus, the way we kind of got into this was partially coincided with my arrival at Klaus, and I have a background in hydrography and bathymetry, but it was also, we were doing work with USGS under a funded grant from GLRI, not that $1 billion, but it was still ultimately through DMI to create the bottom mapping working groups. But anyway, the bottom mapping working group was ultimately actually how we sort of came to the party on bathymetry in the Great Lakes. And so that was sort of, I don't know if it was directly one of those programs, but it was a trickle down. It wasn't a huge amount of money. It was only a couple $100,000, but it allowed us to hire Lyndon, who's here today, and expand our footprint with bathymetry. Some of the other programs under the IIJA funds, he mentioned that a little bit, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I think. Gloss is planning on, we're sort of hoping, I think fingers crossed, it's not a done deal, to receive some funding under that for regional ocean partnerships, which will allow us to continue our work with Lakebed 2030. We've done some work with IOCM as well. So, I think the money does sort of trickle down. I don't know, Hans, if your group receives any of that type of funding, but it is a bit of a convoluted, it's not a direct connection between the programs that you mentioned and assets in the water or real data collection initiatives.
Yeah, I can add a lot of the work that we've done with parks has direct support from GLRI, and over the years we've been able to turn that into student opportunities and part of our programming. So it does make an impact on what we're able to do. And then from an infrastructure standpoint, it's not getting to us yet, but it will create those markets that then become those avenues for the technology, for the workforce that are vastly misunderstood in terms of the right approaches for doing that. And so I think that will be a catalyst for more opportunity. And while we won't get direct funding from that, we will see the opportunity for attracting new bodies into our programs and putting them out in good job opportunities. So that's how I see that working for us.
GLRI, as I mentioned, I'll say we certainly benefit from that as well. For the investment in GLRI, some of that finds its way to us to support these boundary initiatives here in Great Lakes. We're very thankful for that. We mentioned the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Infrastructure. We spent a lot, we've all spent some time this morning talking about how is critical geospatial infrastructure for the nation. And yet, frustratingly, there is, as far as I'm aware, no specific money for ocean mapping in IIJA. So I think that speaks to the need for advocacy and for helping folks like the senator understand what is infrastructure. And that good maps of our seafloors and lake floors are a critical piece of that. Now, it is one of the most significant forces that funding that's coming to NOAA is for coastal flood inundation mapping, and that's another area where good bathymetry, high resolution bathymetry in your coastal zone is absolutely critical. And so within Coast Survey, we'll be executing a portion of that, relatively small portion of that funding coming to NOAA to build out and improve our high resolution bathymetric maps in near-shore waters, where the coupling of the storm surge models and the freshwater models are bounded by shallow bathymetry. So we can improve that model, and understand how rising sea levels, king tides, increased stormwater runoff are from those coastal communities. But that was a realization that occurred in NOAA. That we needed that high resolution bathymetry, and we have the capacity through our in-house resources and our contract partners to go and get it and improve those models. That's not something that was understood in the Hall of Congress when they crafted that.
Any other questions for the panel?
Mr. Within BOEM, when they do seismic surveys in the Gulf of Mexico areas, the hydrographic data that's collected during those surveys, a copy of that goes to BOEM. Have we thought about doing something similar with that? Because you're talking about all this possible data that's hidden on hard drives in private hands or within company hands that isn't being put into the public domain. Could that then, if a wind farm and the company wants to come in, part of the cost of doing business for them would then be any data they collect for then goes into NOAA to be put into the public domain. Is that ongoing?
Yeah, that's definitely ongoing, and we do have a strong relationship with them. With respect to offshore energy development, I think there's some reluctance on the part of the private sector developers, which is understandable, to release really high resolution data, which is giving them a whole. And that's particularly true here on the East Coast, where the majority of that pre-development survey work has been the responsibility of the private sector. On the West Coast, the situation is a little bit different, where BOEM is doing and sponsoring some of that work being done with our sponsoring some of that baseline survey work, which will guide the permitting and leasing process. But to your point about, specifically your point about developing relationships with the private sector partners who may be interested in energy development, that's actually something we're working on. We do have an MOU in place with Northwestern, which permits for the transfer of hydrographic data. I think we did get, looking at Barrett, I think we did in fact get the first tranche of that data just this past year. So Orsted is a good example. We've been very forward-leaning on this. There are other private sector entities out there we'd love to partner with. But that's absolutely an area where we're continuing to push and hope to see progress. But thank you for being here.
Other questions for any of the panelists?
Thank you very much for the good presentation this morning. We've mentioned, or you presented mostly the plan for what I would call remote sensing in situ, using ships, using remote vehicles, and it's all good. What do you have a plan, and do you see the value of satellite-based bathymetry or that type of satellite-based remote sensing, which is not necessarily high resolution, but could give a good snapshot of the shoreline and the coastal zone?
I'll hold the microphone, so I'll take that first. But the short answer is yes. Satellite drive bathymetry is an area that we're looking at. I think for as long as there has been such a thing. I believe we have a representative of our national genetic survey here because their remote sensing division. It has been really in the lead on that. So we in survey rely heavily on their expertise. But we have a number of small business innovative research, SBIR grants that have on forward funding innovation in satellite bathymetry and GSRC. We've used it in some cases. In some cases, frankly, it's misled us, which has made us a little bit gun shy. How do we really use this? Do we use this as a reconnaissance tool? Do we use it as the best available data when it is the best available data, even though we know that sometimes it's spectacularly wrong? But I think understanding those cases and the consequences of those cases. So, for instance, if we put a giant shoal on the turn in the North Shore of Alaska, that turns out not to be there, is that really the end of the world? Is that a reason to throw satellite bathymetry out with the bathwater? I don't really know. I think that it can be, particularly in those areas that are difficult to access, rapidly changing. I'm thinking a lot about Alaska here, but I'm sure there's Great Lakes applications as well. That there really is an application there. And we just need to understand the uncertainties associated with that before we can really just dive in all the way.
Oh, my goodness.
Somebody else hold the mic.
Other questions we can all answer.
In your opinion, do you feel that we're on target in terms of meeting the 2030 piece? And if not, where do we think we should be applying the greatest amount of effort to meet that goal?
Well, we're referring to like a 2040, yeah, we're totally on track. Well, I think it's hard to gauge, Derek. And for those on video, the question was, are we on track to meet the goals for 2030? And I see it as what's the goal? Are we going to have a 1 meter resolution coastline binational elevation model of the Great Lakes by 2030? Maybe not. Probably not, right? Is that really the goal? I also don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is to generate momentum and a movement around high density mapping in the Great Lakes so that over time we can fill in, as the CEBA 2030 people refer to it often, the puzzle pieces. There's probably no scenario ever where someone's going to walk into this room with a large suitcase of $200 million and say, all right, TJ, turn around and start mapping systematically. I don't think that's how it's going to go. I think it's going to be a collaborative effort with a variety of different tiers of collecting organizations, whether it's citizen science or whether it's white ships in the lake. And ultimately that'll fill in. So if, I would say from GLOS's perspective, if we're on track to doing that by 2030, then we have fulfilled our goal. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I would only add to that, I would never want to put this as a grade and 60% will be failing, because 60% will be phenomenal. And if we are on track and moving towards goals, if the year shifts, I think what we've been able to accomplish by 2030 is going to be profound. And to me, that's what we need here. That's what we need in World Ocean. That's where this initiative really gets energized. So, yeah, that's where I feel. I'm right. You said it perfectly. So.
I agree with what you said, and I'll just add really one thing I mentioned in my presentation, that I feel like Great Lakes is a significant but achievable chunk of our broader CBET 2030 goals. And I think the latest statistic is what, 52% of the US EEZ remains on that. It's anyway, we're not doing great in the US EEZ. You could argue, well, only what, as of this year, 93% of the Great Lakes remaining on that, but it's a much smaller area. We have Canadian partners to work with. We have this organization, this effort that has sprung up to focus attention. So I continue to think that, is it easy? Are we, if you kind of draw the trend line, based on where we are and where we stand today, we may not be on the 2030 mark, but I think that this is an area where we really could make a difference and demonstrate how it's done, and then apply that to other, particularly transboundary areas around the world to meet that overall CBET 2030 goal. So I'm very excited about what we can accomplish here, and I think what we're generating energy around to accomplish.
Other questions?
Do we know what our Canadian partners have done? And are they beyond the 7%?
I don't want to speak for our Canadian partners. I think we'll hear from them later in the. Christine, would you like to respond?
Well, I think I'm very kind of where we're at in my conversation. They thought